Hi there, Earth Nation. This is Amanda with the Activated Earth, and this is Summit 2023, all about nature connection and what it can do for you when you're immersed in nature and what that connection looks like to various different people. And I've been inspired by this group that I found, one of whom is Dean Hall here, and I'm going to read his bio to you. And after reading this bio, I'm still convinced that you're Superman.
That's funny.
So Dean has been a licensed clinical therapist and coach for over 30 years. Astonishingly, in that time, he has conducted over 50,000 face-to-face one-hour sessions. Besides being a best-selling author and highly sought-after speaker, Dean is also a two-time cancer survivor, a widower, and a two-time world record-setting extreme distance swimmer. He is the first person to swim the entire 187-mile length of Oregon's longest river, the Willamette, which he did as an active cancer patient in 2014, and Ireland's longest river, the River Shannon, 180 miles in 2017. This much time spent immersed in the flow of mighty rivers has changed Dean's life in many dynamic and miraculous ways. His Willamette River swim threw Dean into radical remission, unexpectedly healing his leukemia without chemo or radiation, while easing his trauma and grief from losing his wife 15 days before their 30th anniversary. Buoyed by his firsthand experience of the healing power of nature when his lymphoma worsened and doctors once again pushed him to do chemo and radiation, Dean chose to try forest bathing first. Dr. Lee's research on the proven efficacy of time spent in forests and how it boosted natural killer cells and the immune system by over 250 times for a period of 2 weeks gave Dean the courage to decide instead for a weekly regimen of forest bathing. In May of 2015, he started spending all day once a week forest bathing deep in the Mount Hood wilderness, and by March of 2016, he was declared cancer-free. These gifts of natural healing pushed Dean to make his organization the Wild Cure Way, whose mission is to encourage the world to get out of concrete jungles, man-made boxes, and away from the digital devices and dive deeply into wild waterways and venture into deep forests as a form of authentic, deep healing and, oddly enough, environmental protection. He believes it's impossible to swim in wild waters or amble through ancient forests without falling in love with them. And like Jacques Cousteau used to say, you protect what you love. That really actually, that last line, when I read that the first time, just really touched my heart, because that is so true. And I can tell that you have really created this connection with nature that has served you really well. And what I'm wondering is, when you were in the throes of being sick, what was your motivation to actually choose to go try nature connecting, like the swim? I know that with the Dr. Lee, you saw that part, but with the swimming, didn't that come before you had heard about forest bathing?
Yes. Well, no, I read a bit on a new field at the time called ecopsychology, and it's the study of the therapeutic use of nature to heal. But at the time, I was dying in August of 2013, almost 10 years ago now. I'm pretty fit. I've got right around 10% body fat. And I weigh 215 pounds. I'm 6'1" and a half. I probably don't need to say a half, but you know how us guys are.
Of course.
I'm 6'1", and at that time I weighed 152 pounds. So you might imagine I was skeletal, and the biggest things on me were my lymph nodes. They'd swollen up under my jawline, and so that I could hardly turn my neck. I had over 40 lymph nodes that were vastly swollen. One, my oncologist lovingly called my hockey puck under my right arm, because it was the size and shape almost exactly of a hockey puck. Couldn't put my right arm down. And I was dying. I just lost my first wife 2.5 years earlier, and she died October of my daughter's senior year in high school.
Mhm.
And so here I was now dying, and my daughter was kind of getting a bit frantic that she was about to lose her second parent. And I adore her so much that I knew I had to find a way to live, at least give it my best effort. And I don't know if you've read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, but I'd used it many times in therapy. He was an Austrian psychiatrist uh, right before World War II. Sadly for him, he was Jewish,
Mhm.
and he spent quite a bit of time in Auschwitz and then Bergen-Belsen. And for his PhD, he had wanted to do a research study testing under extreme circumstances. Why do some people live and survive and others don't? Well, ethically, he couldn't find a way to do it. And after about a month or two of suffering in Auschwitz, the thought came to him, oh my goodness, I would not have chosen this, but this is a perfect lab situation for me. And
Mm.
so he started watching people and scribbling little notes on scraps of paper, rolling them up and sticking them in the cracks of the walls so that the guards wouldn't, take his work. And he started watching who survived and who didn't. And his hypothesis of you've got to be physically strong as well as mentally strong went out the window nearly immediately. He found that really it all came down to how passionate you were about a purpose. And the two main purposes he found is people either just desperately wanted to see their loved ones again, or they wanted to live long enough to kill Nazis. Okay. Um, and it really didn't matter. It just mattered how intrinsically tied they were to that purpose. So I knew that if I could really gain a strong sense of purpose, I had my best chance. But by this time, I literally was just a shell of a man. I didn't care. I'd had a good run. I had created, I'd been an art teacher for 20 years that I really enjoyed working with thousands of kids. My biggest goal in life was to create a happy, loving relationship like I'd seen my parents have, which was very odd for the 1960s. They were really the unicorns of the 60s because they adored each other and they were very fit. I grew up here in Oregon, they were both mountain climbers. Um, and so I'd seen this and I'd accomplished it, and now it was gone. And so nothing really mattered. And so I started meditating and asking, even prayerfully, for a purpose, for a sign. And I expected to have something within a day or two, maybe a week or two. But
Mhm.
after about 3 or 4 weeks and it's still being crickets, I was just like, okay, whatever. And then my mom came over and handed me a box. She'd finally cleaned out my very last things from her house. And in it was a journal I'd been forced to keep when I was in sixth grade. Because if you know 11-year-old boys, most of us are not going to keep a journal unless we're forced to. And I
I
opened
have
it
a
up.
son, so I know something about that.
Yeah, I bet so. And I opened it up, and the uh, very first page, it said, when I get old, I gotta climb Mount Everest, swim the English Channel. And when I read that, I I had forgotten how much I was passionate about becoming a world-class adventurer when I was a kid, because even my mom in the 60s was climbing mountains with the guys.
Mhm.
And I spent most of my childhood out in the Cascade mountain range, climbing and swimming across alpine lakes. I think I had like the perfect childhood, for me anyway. It was wonderful. And my folks had had some world-class mountaineers who'd climbed Everest, and I'd gotten to meet them and was inspired by them. But then I became very responsible. I thought, no, I've got to work for a corporation and all that kind of stuff, get a college degree. And I'd forgotten these dreams for responsibility's sake, I guess. I don't know. But it awakened something within me. And immediately I thought, okay, my blood counts are so poor and my immune system's so low. I know it couldn't handle elevation. So Everest is out, but I can swim the English Channel. I don't know why I thought I could. And so without telling anyone for weeks, except for I told my oncologist and my doctor, and both of them begged me not to even get into a public pool. They said my immune system was so bad at that time that if I got in a public pool, it could kill me.
Mhm.
And, but I thought, I told my oncologist, hey, doc, I'm dying anyway.
Right.
What do you want me to do? Lay on a couch and watch Wheel of Fortune? I'm not going out that way. And so I got in the pool, and I'd done a lot of triathlons in the 80s and 90s. And so I'd done hundreds and hundreds of miles of lap swimming. And when I kicked off the wall, it was the first time in 3 years I felt like me again. I felt a sense of that old self and that old spirit, and I felt a bit of control. And so, yeah, that's what made me pick it, was that strong sense of purpose, and mostly not to leave my 21-year-old daughter an orphan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a random way of getting into what Nature Connection can do for you. And I guess that coupled with an intense purpose was something that you have a goal, and even if it seems impossible to actually pursue it.
Right.
So when you coach now, how do you incorporate what Nature Connection looks like to you into your coaching?
There are many ways. The first is our own personal nature. I believe as humans, we were not meant to be sedentary. You look at our ancestors, even 100 years ago, and they were much less sedentary than we are. My mom's mom, my grandma, came from Sweden, and she could outwork anyone. We spent all day in the berry field. She had a berry and dairy farm out here in Oregon, and even my Swedish grandmother was so much less sedentary than most of the people I know. But can you imagine what our ancient ancestors were? They were always moving unless they were resting. They moved. They were very, very physically active, and then spent intentional time of rest. And we just kind of float in between the two, not really doing either. And so the first thing I do in coaching, if at all possible, it's a little harder since I'm doing a lot of it remotely now, but when they're in my person, and even as they're doing it remotely, I ask them to be up walking. Now, if it's in a suburb, okay, city, not so much. But best case scenario is when they're with me, we're walking a trail, because the second most powerless position is sitting, only eclipsed by kneeling. That's why kidnappers and terrorists always make you kneel, because it signals to your subconscious you are totally powerless. Sitting is the second most helpless position. And that's what we do for coaching or therapy. We put people in a subconscious powerless position and then ask them to talk about what they already feel powerless about. It just makes no sense to me. But when you're up and you're moving forward, it signals, I believe, because I've had a lot of experience with clients, seeing the difference between their breakthroughs when they're sitting and their chance of a breakthrough when they're up and walking. It signals to your body and mind that you're moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, and you have that ability to. So that's the first thing that I do, is work with just our own personal physical nature. And inside that, I let them know that what most people don't know is that your brain chemistry isn't just assigned and developed by your genetics, but it's about 40% what you've had to eat or drink in the last 2 weeks to 2 months. And so if you're filling your body with junk, and then you have this really awful mood or high anxiety, well, maybe it's like putting sugar in your gas tank in your car. So you've got to fuel the body correctly as well. Yeah. But what I'm doing now that I really love is taking people out into nature, challenging them just a little bit. Depending on the person, depends on how active and extreme the challenge will be. But a lot of times just taking them out and getting them off a trail and saying, hey, can you hear water? Find a safe way to get to that water. Something as simple as that really can scare people because they've never had that experience. And then once we get to water, I have them sit and just gaze at the water. I don't know if you've heard about the theory of blue mind, Wallace J. Nichols' work. Yeah, he wrote a national bestseller called Blue Mind, and it came out in 2012. I didn't hear about it until I started speaking about what happened to me on the Willamette, and people kept mentioning it. So I thought, I better look this guy up. And what he found, he worked with neuropsychologists and found that when you're in, on, around, by, or underwater, within about 30 seconds to 2 minutes, it's universal. It doesn't matter gender, age, anything. Your mind will go down to a rest state within 30 seconds to 2 minutes.
Now, I didn't know that was what it was called. However, I'm fully aware of it. I used to live on the California coast, and the ocean was the ocean was my go-to place. And the reason that I did around it is that there are various ions in the mist from the ocean that shift your mood. And for me, I didn't have to do anything except sit at the ocean, and it would just like draw whatever was bothering me. If I was agitated, upset, anxious, worried, lacking in trust, it would just soak it out of me and just pull it out of me. And I would walk away feeling 100% better.
It does. It's 100%. It's and that's the thing that I think therapy and coaching has to start focusing on, and shifting away from this old Freudian philosophy that you bring people into an office, have them sit on a couch and just verbally vomit. There's a place and a time for that. It's somewhat helpful, but not much. Research shows that only 33% end up getting help that way. 70% walk away with not a lot of help and a lot less cash. So what I've found is that anytime you're deep in a forest, out by a body of water, things happen. And I think in the next 10 years, we will learn almost exponentially all sorts of things that are happening beyond our wildest imagination, because we are hardwired to be connected to wild waterways and prairies and mountains and wild places and forests. It's our natural environment. It's like we're tigers that finally get to roam the African plains rather than be locked up in a 6x6 cage, which we've assigned ourselves to, these little concrete boxes that are climate controlled. And most of them are so full of plastic, and now all sorts of electronic waves destabilizing our natural vibrational frequencies. I think it's a big reason we're all so sick.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. when it comes to the swim,
Mhm.
much do you think, and the purpose, how much do you think it was actually the swimming that contributed to you healing? And like water is coded, especially water that's got ocean water in it now. I don't know where along the Willamette you swam, but I've been to Mount Hood. I'm familiar with that region, and I know how the mouth of the river just like opens up and there's ocean everywhere. How much do you think all of the water energy contributed to the healing?
Oh, I think 100%. I mean, it was this beautiful, that's one of the most frequent questions. And I think it's one of the biggest problems we have in our modern culture. It's what I call the either or problem. Was it the purpose, Dean, or the swimming, or was it the water? Yeah, to all of the above, check, check, and check. I'm finding more as I learn more in this field of ecotherapy and ecopsychology, and the more we learn about nature's benefits to our minds and bodies, I'm like, oh yeah, that happened too. And I didn't know it. At the time, what I told the media, and the reason I swam 187 miles, is I had some very specific belief systems and methods that I believed created almost a limitless ability to do just about anything. But the problem I have with a lot of people in my field is they'll say those things, but they're just from a book. Their
Mhm.
lives don't prove it at all. And I wanted my actions to speak louder than words. And so I thought, if a guy that's as sick as I was can swim 187 miles, which I was swimming 3 to 5 marathon distances for 22 days in a row in 40-degree water. And I'm no Olympian. As a matter of fact, I'd never been on a swim team. I was a pretty good swimmer, but I wasn't a competitive swimmer. So I was trying to inspire other cancer patients to refuse to give up and not be um, uh, defined by their diagnosis. That was one of my big goals in doing that. I had no idea. As a matter of fact, I thought I was risking my life to do this thing because that's what my doctors told me. I had no idea there would be healing that would come from it. But as I look back now, the hardest challenge was constantly being hypothermic. I had to get out about every 30 to 45 minutes and do jumping jacks on the riverbank because I'd go into thrombosis, or what they call deep core throttle. I could feel my internal organs banging against my rib cage, and I'd start to get real fuzzy in my thinking. And so I get out, I do jumping jacks, warm back up for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then get back in again. And a lot of times it was really hard to force myself after I'd warmed up to get back in. And I did that for 22 days, not knowing that that cold water immersion was boosting my immune system the
Right,
entire time and
right.
changing the way the mitochondria act, boosting my NK cells. But then, like you were talking, other things were happening. I was getting that earthing effect, the vibrational frequencies from Earth's core, because water, conducts electricity very efficiently.
Yeah.
And then I was also getting that fluid, constant movement. We've heard the phrase go with the flow forever. Um,
Right.
I actually was for 3 weeks. Yeah. And it was funny. It's now become kind of a treatment of choice for combat veterans. They'll get them out surfing or kayaking or paddleboarding to feel that movement of the water and the flow of it because it eases trauma. And we found that to be true with me when I started June 3rd of 2014. I couldn't even say my first wife's name. I couldn't say Mary without crying. And then when we were having the celebration dinner on the 27th, I was telling funny stories about her, and everybody was just looking at me like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "What?" And they said, "You haven't talked about her for 3 years. You couldn't."
Mhm.
And I said, "Really?" And they said, "Yeah." And even without me knowing it, it had soothed and ameliorated a lot of my trauma from that grief and from that loss. And so, so many things were happening in the river, even more than I know, I'm quite sure.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to me, the notion of that helping us with grief, because I do feel like as a culture, we don't we don't have any wisdom that we share around dealing with grief.
Right.
And um do you and you said you've also participated as you've acted as a grief coach. Do you use that in that coaching as well?
Now I do. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I had been considered a grief expert in the Midwest all during the late 90s and early 2000s because I'd done so many additional certifications and trainings in it. And then when my first wife died, I was so shattered that I realized in some ways, because I'd had no life experience in it, that I'd been somewhat of an imposter. And I even called up two of the clients that I'd worked with and apologized, said,
Huh.
I didn't know it was this bad. And they kind of laughed and they were really gracious. And they said, Dean, it was helpful anyway. And we we knew you didn't know, and that's okay. And so that was nice. But I was shocked at how little I actually knew what the experience was like. Now, though, I will take people out and either a lot of people aren't good enough swimmers, but get them in a kayak or even just sitting by the river or an ocean. My daughter had just, as you might imagine, terrible, terrible grief because she was at that launching stage where she was getting ready to leave and trying to learn how to become an adult when this thing happened. Typically, between the ages of 18 and 25, they have a delayed effect. They kind of go underground and everything's fine for 4 to 6 years, and then it hits them. And I've seen that exact thing happen. My daughter's now 30. A year ago, she's had a pretty tough time. Um, and so a year ago, she moved to the Oregon coast and has just lived there and walks the beach every day. And it has changed her. It's been what I'd almost say, and it probably shouldn't say this as a therapist, but it's been better than therapy for her because it's been a very visceral, very authentic form of therapy. And like your experience, she says the ocean just pulls it out of her. She
Yeah.
can be having a terrible day of grief and just go and sit on her favorite sand dune all alone and just breathe and watch and wait. And within 15 minutes, at the most an hour, she's fine again.
Yeah, it's fast. It's amazing. That's one thing that I miss about being where I was, is having access to the ocean.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do have a very nice creek out here.
Oh, do you?
I do. And perfect, like for talking about forest bathing, I have a forest right
Oh,
my backyard.
perfect.
So yeah, so I would love to hear about your experience with that. And
Yeah.
love to, I love trees, and like as a
Mhm.
scientist and as a tree hugger, um, for what they do, and what
Right.
they do for the earth and what they do for people. And I would
Sure.
love to hear your experience around that.
Yeah. I lived in Kansas for 30 years because that's where my first wife was from. And so I told all my friends I was putting myself in exile for love. And it was fine, but I was homesick for Oregon every day of the 30 years. And it was mostly for the wild waterways and the trees. I missed the 100-foot Douglas fir trees
Yeah.
because you didn't see anything like that around there. And so when I came back, I did quite a bit of hiking. I was so sick though, I couldn't really get very far into the forest. But when my doctors had told me they wanted me to do chemo and the lymph nodes were getting even bigger, I had read just a little bit about forest bathing, but then I read Dr. King Lee's book and found that out about phytoncides, that essential oil that comes out of trees in a mist. You don't even see it, but you breathe it in, particularly conifers.
Right.
And I thought, if I go out every week and it boosts it by 250 times every 2 weeks, for 2 weeks, if I go out weekly, it'll start becoming exponential. That was my thinking. And what I found, because I would go out Thursday nights and then stay all night in the forest and then stay most of the day, if not all day, Friday. And then before I left, there are several creeks and one river that come out of the glacier in Mount Hood. And I would get in one of those. Since it's snow melt or glacier melt, I'm getting all those glacial minerals and it's really cold. So I'm getting a nice ice bath too. That was my routine. What I found was the forest bathing was extremely good for continuing that work on grief. Maybe it's because I was raised in the 60s and big boys don't cry, all that kind of nonsense. But I would find myself routinely waking up because I wouldn't stay in a campground. I'd go up a trail for about 2 or 3 miles, and then I'd get off the trail for about a half mile to a mile where no one could find me, way out in the middle of an old growth forest where the trees hadn't seen people probably for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And these trees felt, as odd as it may sound, they felt welcoming and friendly. The area just had this beautiful feeling to it. I was never scared out there. So many of my friends are like, what about mountain lions? What about bears? And I'm like, well, thankfully, I haven't seen any yet. I've heard a couple, I think, but I never felt afraid. But routinely, I'd wake up at about 1, just sobbing. And I felt like it was the trees pulling it out of me. It literally felt like something was pulling this emotion out of me. Now that I understand a little bit more about trees and how they're basically antennae from the Earth's core energy and create a vibrational field, I honestly think electronically, I was having these huge discharges and it felt like it. And so now what I do is I'll take folks out and I'll just tell them to wait. And within about an hour or so, boom, it just starts happening. And if they can stay with it and just let it happen, within an hour or so, it subsides. And then I have them a lot of times, if they can, if they will, I'll have them get in a creek or a river and just plunge for a few minutes to kind of wash it all off and wash themselves and reboot. And that combination I found is so powerful for trauma and grief and even chronic illness. And it was for me, but it was something I'd never heard of. I'd never heard of anyone using that approach. But boy, it sure was a winning combination for me.
Yeah, this leads me to more things that I'm curious about. And
Sure.
I'm wondering if you feel like this combination of things is a universal cure for whatever the dis-ease is, whether it's mental, physical, or spiritual.
I absolutely do. I believe the fundamental reason we're all so addicted, depressed, anxious, and chronically ill is we live in concrete jungles and with rubber-soled shoes and are largely sedentary. We're basically very sick, caged animals, and we're not connecting with Mother Earth in the way that we used to in the way that is very natural. For some reason, I don't know if it was with Descartes and the mind body split, but
Mm,
our society has morphed to the point where being out in nature is seen as unnatural. I can't tell you how many of my friends made so much fun of me for going out once they found out I was spending a full day in the forest, even though they knew it was for my cancer. They thought it was the craziest thing they'd ever heard. They thought it was funny and weird.
yeah.
And I was just like, whatever. I just kind of didn't pay much attention to it. The funny thing is, now that I've been doing it for a number of years, it was really after only I just didn't listen and just kept going. After about 2 years of it, I noticed that's how a lot of them introduced me to their friends. Yeah, this is the guy that goes out once a week. You're the guy that used to make fun of me. But yeah, I believe in being very connected first to Mother Earth, then to ourselves, gives us the ability to then be connected to each other in
Right.
kind and powerful and healthy ways. And I believe it really, truly, Amanda, is all about connection. But the missing piece for us is connecting with Mother Earth. You know, I learned from Clint Ober and his whole theory of earthing
Mhm.
that basically our bodies are shaped like electrical prongs, and we just aren't ever connecting into that source. And that source is Earth. You know,
Mhm.
I'm going to a funeral again today, but went to one not long ago, and it was kind of a traditional one. And they said that old phrase we've all heard hundreds and hundreds of times: ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And I
Right.
got to thinking, oh my gosh, that's our entire life cycle. We come from Earth, we return to Earth. I'd heard many people call it Mother Earth, but I never really thought, oh, we are mud, we return to mud. Why don't we spend more time connecting with mud? You know, it
Yeah.
it it made perfect sense to me then why what I call the wild cure way is so essentially primary and easy. It's because it's our nature.
I see it that way too, and I look at it as a complete circuit. You know, when we get our bare feet on the ground or we get our
Right,
hands in the garden. That's why so many people garden to
right,
relax. You know, you get your feet on the ground, then we are a complete electrical circuit, and all the stuff that gets stuck in us can move through. Then we
right.
can actually go with the flow. And
Exactly.
I like to think of it as like when you're not doing that, you're stuck in a rut, but there's a different, you can also be in a groove. So if you're in a groove, everything is going. If you're stuck in a rut, then you've got a problem. Um, what I would like to ask you about right now is actually for me personally,
Sure.
because I have been on my own search for shifting my what I have going on with my immune system. So there's a lot of autoimmune that runs in my family, and I developed adult onset type 1 diabetes in my mid
Mm,
40s,
wow.
and I know it's an autoimmune disease, and so I feel like it can heal. I feel like if there's a way in to disease, then there's a way back out.
I
And
believe.
I've played with the cold baths. I don't have a place to be like in an icy cold bath. But based on what I've heard about it previously, I feel like it could be a good contributor to actually healing my immune system. I'm just wondering, what would you tell somebody like me who I believe this can heal? I believe I can create balance again in my body. What would you recommend I do?
Well, first, I'd say more of that. belief is so primary. The type of leukemia that I had was called chronic lymphocytic leukemia. The Western medicine belief is that once you get it, it will never go away and that you just have to manage it. And someday it will shorten your life and someday you'll die from it, but a slow death. And I never believed that. Like you, I believed what the body creates, the body can heal. And then I found out that every 13 to 18 months, we have an entirely new body. Every
Right.
cell in our body sloughs off and regenerates. So I thought if I do the right kinds of things and spend a lot of time dangling a lure in front of that massive subconscious of mine by seeing myself healthy, fit, and whole, that the subconscious will start moving toward that. And so one of the things that I would really encourage, if you don't already do, is start your day, end your day, and maybe even take a midday break. During my recovery, I was visualizing myself being really well and fit and what I'd call ripped. um, uh, at least 3 times a day for about 20 to 30 minutes. And just, Joe Dispenza calls it remembering the future. I would just enjoy it and enjoy how that felt. I'd take a step out of my sick little body and feel what it felt to be healthy and strong again. And since you've already got that belief system, that's foundational.
Okay.
And then I would really start looking at what you're eating and drinking, because that's either going to, it's very rarely neutral. It's either going to feed health or disease. And especially the way things are here in America, it's probably going, if you're not really careful, it's probably going to feed disease. I already thought that. But then when we lived in Ireland, we were in Ireland for 6.5 weeks when I swam the Shannon. And I took my daughter over there to be my guide boater because I wanted her to have that same time on the river. And I had fallen in love with this beautiful woman and married her. And so I took my new wife over there too. She's a trooper. She'd have to be. It was quite a struggle. But we all noticed we got healthier. And it was because they have so many less preservatives and additives, and they have so many more strictures against that kind of thing. The food we were getting was really feeding us. And so here in America, they put so much junk in our food. We have to be kind of watchdogs, not obsessive, but careful.
I am pretty I'm pretty cautious about what I put in my body. That's part of why I am where I am in Eastern Kentucky, because I wanted to create my own food and I couldn't create land space in California. It was just too expensive for me. So I came here, and the food here is it's like getting Whole Foods. So everybody's growing stuff, everybody's raising animals. I'm a pretty intense foodie. I call myself a food snob.
Oh, do you really?
I'm a complete food snob, and I actually have diabetes to thank for that. So it required me to get really, really snobby about what I put in my body. Could probably even do better than I do. But thank you for the advice. I'll incorporate that into my day. I was wondering if there's anything else about the Wild Cure that you wanted to add. You mentioned it briefly, but I was wondering if you could give me is there sort of a template or a process that it covers? I'm going to buy it, by the way. I definitely.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah. I haven't put a book out yet. The Wild Cure is just about my Willamette swim. Okay. And then I say a little bit, and then the last chapter is about how the cold water healed my immune system and my cancer. But I believe, and what the Wild Cure Way and my coaching is based upon, is the 4 elements. And so I think number one, if you want to get well, you need to connect with nature more than our society would ever guess, in still and maybe even solitary ways. People either connect with nature, and very few do, but either they do it mindlessly, they go to a campground and drink a lot of beer, and I got nothing against that, but that's camping, but it's not what I'd call a nature connection. Maybe you're connecting with others or a can of beer. I don't know.
Yeah.
The second is more like my parents. I connected a lot with nature with my parents, but they saw it as a playground, almost their form of Disneyland. It was recreational. And so that's still a bit removed from nature connection.
Mhm.
You called yourself a tree hugger. When I go out forest bathing, I will talk to the trees, as
Yep.
crazy as that sounds. As I
No,
go
I do the same
by,
thing.
yeah, as I go by, I'll put my hands on them. I will look at them. I'll try to see if I can smell what they smell like. I'll try to use all my senses just to be there and connect in that present moment with that area. I take my shoes off. And so that's the first. Earth is the first element.
Mhm.
I would encourage you to spend time with earth. Then water, when you're out, if that creek goes through the forest, or if it doesn't, then spend time by your creek just watching it or putting your feet in it, whatever you want to do. Just in your time, if you want a cure, spend that time with water. And then air or wind. There are several ways to do this. The way I implement it in my Wild Cure Way is to use the breath. I mean, it's the first thing that gives us life. It's the first thing we do once we're on earth, is take a big, deep breath. And then we forget how. Uh, Dr. Gay Hendricks, are you familiar with him?
No.
Yeah, he's great. I just love this guy. He's kind of what started the self-help industry way back in the 80s. He was the first person. I read his book in 84, 85. Can't remember what it was called, but he was the first person I ever heard talk about breath and how important monitoring your breath is. And he's a doctor, and he gave 50 little kids their school physicals from the time they were in kindergarten to the time they graduated, because he wanted to see, and he didn't tell anybody what he was really doing. He wanted to see how their breath patterns changed. When he gave them their school physical right before they went into kindergarten, all of them were breathing slowly and deeply and diaphragmatically. And by the time they were entering sixth grade, none of them were. They were
Mhm.
all moderate to high chest breathers, because the more you get threatened, the more you get into fight or flight chronically, the higher and faster you're going to breathe. And so part of the Wild Cure Way is getting out, noticing weather and wind patterns, but also breathing everything you see and feel in, and then letting everything you see and feel out. And
Okay.
when I was grieving, that's what I gave myself permission to do deep in the forest. I would let myself connect with how awful I felt and how miserable I was, and then I would let it out. I tell everybody the thing I learned from that is the emotional system works just like the digestive system. We chew up life's experiences, be they good or bad. That's exactly what we need to be healthy, happy, whole, strong. But there are a lot of waste products. Those waste products are anger, sadness, fear, hurt, loneliness, guilt, and shame, the big seven. And
Right.
because they're so intense and we know so little about them, we try to make them mean something, or we give meaning to the people that elicited those in us. And mostly they're just psychological and emotional urine and feces. We just need to let our body do what it was designed to do. And so if we'll let ourselves cry or maybe scream or maybe even hit something, not someone, of course, thrash around a bit, because you watch any 2-year-old, they do that. There aren't any psychologically unhealthy 2-year-olds because when they get
Right.
upset, they let it out. They feel
They
it, they
do.
release it. 5 minutes later, they're fine. And so we have to go back to that and find a good, responsible adult way to do that. And one of the safest ways to do that is in nature. And
Yeah.
so using your own air in a nature-based way is really good. And then fire is a great way to create inspiration. You can sit and watch it. It's a great meditational tool. It's a great communal tool. I can't tell you how many times when I've had people around a fire, they open up and tell stories that they wouldn't have told if they weren't sitting around a fire. It's almost magical. It's also a great way to let go, write things down, watch the fire consume it. And so I would encourage you to find Amanda's way of connecting with the 4 elements, because you'll find instinctively it feels comfortable, it feels natural, and things start to happen in your life, in your body, in your mind that wouldn't if you were sitting on a couch talking to me.
Yeah. I'm really inspired by that.
Good.
I have a meditation that I use for healing that
Yeah.
actually uses the elements of the 4 directions.
Oh, perfect.
So I feel like I've been doing many of the right things, and maybe I'm just not being consistent enough. So
Consistency,
yeah,
healing disease takes consistency.
right.
Healing takes real intentionality. Start your day in a very happy, fun way. End your day in a very soothing way, where you're doing what I call zeroing out. I won't let myself take in. The latest in dream theory is that we dream as a means of our subconscious working out the most intense emotion we had that day. So what I started doing is trying to feel and release, go through my day and feel and release any negative or intense emotion I had that day, so I can go like a clean slate into sleep.
Mhm.
Because I didn't want the subconscious never sleeps. I didn't want it chewing and festering and growing these awful negative emotions so that I was in a worse state. So do those kinds of things, Amanda, at the start of your day and at the end of your day. With the cold water, yeah, I would encourage you to explore it and do it routinely. I've got probably 20 people now that are making DIY cold tanks.
I
They
probably
just,
do that.
yeah, they just
Space
get
for it.
the old horizontal chest freezers and take all the shelving out, plug up the holes, fill it full of water, shut the top, turn down, it's there.
That's
And
perfect.
so for a
Easy.
couple $100, they've got something that many times, especially if there's small children around, they can even lock. Yeah, and it's kind of climate controlled, and then they pump it out every couple weeks, keeping it so cold it doesn't get stinky and mildewy or
Right.
bacteria ridden very quickly.
Yeah.
So it doesn't even take a lot of care. Yeah.
That sounds great. It has been just a real joy having this conversation with you. How can people get in touch with you if they would like to work with you?
Yeah, my new website is still kind of under construction, but you can get the basics there. It's called thewildcureway.com. Also, I'm on Instagram way more than I want to be, but it's how I get a lot of fun conversations. Well, it's how I met you.
Right.
And
How I found you. Mhm.
yeah, and because I'm me, I feel it's my duty to respond to everybody that DMs me or even makes a comment on one of my posts. I've had the luxury of having 3 or 4 posts go viral. And so then all of a sudden trying to answer 800 people was like a full-time job.
I bet.
But I'm happy to. I feel like if I can use the suffering that I had to go through for good, and I can do anything to ease the suffering of someone else, taking a little extra time is the least I can do. But
Yeah.
so I'm pretty available on Instagram. My Instagram handle is @DeanHallOfficial.
Yeah, I've noticed that there's another Dean Hall out there. So if you try to Google him, you're gonna find I can't remember some
Yeah,
sports.
there are 2 of them.
Yeah.
One is this little nerdy video game creator.
Yeah, yeah,
The other one's this huge, buff, bald, great saxophone jazz
right,
player.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm somewhere in between the 2.
But don't worry, if you haven't written anything down, all of Dean's links will be included in your email when you receive this interview. Thank you so much for being part of this summit, Dean. It was really, really rewarding for me. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, Amanda. I really appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity.
And now we get to